Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode number 77. Our guest today is Bob Emiliani from the Center for Lean Business Management. He's a previous guest. This is now his fourth appearance on the Lean Blog Podcast, and you can go to www.leanpodcast.org to find links to old episodes where Bob talks about some of his previous books. But today we're going to be discussing quite an old book that he rediscovered and republished by Frank Woollard called The Principles of Mass and Flow Production. So today Bob will talk about how he found this book, the research that it inspired, and why this book is relevant today as a matter of some important lean history. So as always, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. Well, Bob, it's great to have you joining us once again here on the Lean Blog Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're going to be able to talk about a recent project of yours where you republished an old out-of-print book written by Frank Woollard. So I was wondering if you can tell the listeners, who was Frank Woollard and what did he do?
Sure. Frank Woollard is regarded as one of the fathers of the British motor industry. He was born in London in 1883, a very modest background. He was the son of a butler, and his mother was a kitchen maid. He had some aptitude for technical things, so he apprenticed as a mechanical engineer for a railway starting around 1899, and in that job was first exposed to a very basic form of flow production. And then around 1905, he entered the British automotive industry as a parts designer. 2 years later, he joined a company called E.G. Wrigley in Birmingham, and they were a maker of gearboxes, axles, steering components, and other components for British automobile companies. In that job, he was chief draftsman, but a few years later, he took on responsibilities as production engineer, and it was there that he reorganized production from batch to a simple form of flow, primarily to meet the increase in orders for vehicle components. From there, a gentleman named William Morris, who was the founder and owner of Morris Motors Limited, got to know Woollard first when he was working at Wrigley. And they had developed a relationship over the years, and Morris recognized Woolard's talents in part design and production, and then named Woollard general manager of Morris Engines Limited in January of 1923. And upon getting that assignment, Woollard immediately led the reorganization of engine production from batch to flow, because that was the bottleneck area. And so Woollard was able to increase output from less than 300 engines per week in January 1923 to 600 engines per week by the end of that year to 1,200 engines per week by December 1924. So what's so interesting about all of this is that the major changes in production system design took place remarkably quickly over a period of less than 2 years. And in comparison, a reorganization of Toyota's engine shop some 25 years later in the 1950s took 6 years to do, and at half the production volume that was produced at Morris Motors. In addition, what Woollard did was remarkably similar to current-day lean production principles and practices. His flow production system included most of today's lean principles and processes, and in particular things like U-shaped cells, multi-skilled workers, working to attack time, standardized work, just-in-time, supermarkets, automation, and quick changeover. So remarkably, that's just a short list. There's more. Woollard also had the distinction of proving prior to Toyota that achieving flow in lower volume production compared to Ford resulted in costs that were nearly as low as that which you could achieve in large-scale mass production. And another thing that he did that's distinctive was that he was the first to develop mechanical materials handling equipment known as automatic transfer machines, which were well ahead of their time. Around 25 years later, in the 50s, late 40s and early 50s, these things would begin to become common in the global automotive industry. So overall, what we have here is that Woollard's contribution to progressive manufacturing management practice is really substantial and comparable to Taiichi Ohno's work.
Well, that is surprising considering how far back in history this goes. I mean, how did you find out about Mr. Woollard and his contributions?
Well, I was researching the Maxey-Silbertson automotive cost reduction curve. I was trying to find out more about that, and I eventually tracked it down to their 1957 book, The Motor Industry, and that's where the authors, the economists George Maxey and Aubrey Silbertson, referred to Woollard's work on flow production, and in the 20s, and then later, and as well as his book that was published in 1954. So I found a copy of Woolard's book and was just really blown away by what I had read. So that got me, very energized to start a year-long research program to learn more about Woolard's life and work. And I uncovered a huge amount of new information. And along the way, I've been working very closely with a former Morris Motors employee and Morris Motors historian, Peter Seymour, as well as his colleagues Jonathan Wood and Robin Barraclough, who are well-known historians of the British motor industry. In continuing to research this past summer I visited Birmingham and Coventry, England, I met Peter there, and we researched Woollard and reviewed his archives, and I learned just a tremendous amount of new information about his life and work, as well as I came across some journal papers written by others in the early 20s that tremendously helped contextualize Woolard's accomplishments. And those other papers written by somebody else just enable me to say without hesitation that Woollard was truly a great 20th century pioneer in progressive management and flow production and industrial automation.
Yeah, and that's certainly news to me, and I'm sure it is to a lot of listeners, a new piece of industrial history, lean history. I mean, why do you think his work is important, looking at it today and putting it in context?
Well, I think there's several reasons. The first one is that his application of flow production beginning in 1923 really means that timelines for discoveries and attributions of key accomplishments in lean management need to be revised. So, in other words, the lean timeline needs to really now include Woollard. His work is also important because he wasn't a technocrat like others prior to him that were really mainly interested in using new machines and so forth to replace workers and increase output. And that was far from it. He warned people that flow is the objective and the machinery can be helpful, but it is not necessary to achieve it. He warned against falling in love with machinery for its own sake. Another reason why Woolard's work is so important is that he viewed people as part of the production system, not separate from it, and he gave them responsibilities that would have normally been handled by supervisors in those days. He allowed workers to participate in efforts to improve production processes, which was innovative for its time. But what he did, of course, was more rudimentary and more limited compared to what Toyota did post-World War II, which was a very systematic development of workers' capabilities. I think by now most people are familiar in lean management. There are two principles: continuous improvement and respect for people. And Woollard understands both. He understands the idea and practice of continuous improvement in a flow environment. And he said, let me quote here, that the virtue of flow production lies in the fact that it brings all inconsistencies into the light of day and so provides the opportunity for correcting them, unquote. He also said, quote, the high visibility conferred on the company's activities by flow production will lead to unceasing and continuous improvement. Additionally, he understood that to achieve flow production, the management practice had to be non-zero sum, meaning workers have to be respected and they have to benefit from flow production as well as customers. And he had a good understanding of what we call today continuous improvement and respect for people.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're describing there certainly sounds like state-of-the-art lean management. So, with this discovery, how did Woollard fall through the cracks? Why didn't we know about his work any sooner than now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Woollard, he wrote numerous articles in trade magazines and numerous journal papers and in technical journals describing his flow production system. And he wrote these papers beginning in the mid-1920s and into the late 40s and mid-1950s. His technical papers were published in a widely read journal at the time called Machinery. And for some reason, those papers, as well as his 1954 book, which was titled Principles of Mass and Flow Production, fell into obscurity, and it's just not really clear why that is. The unfortunate thing, of course, is that Woollard's work is completely missing from current-day lean management literature, which is really a big failure on the part of lean management researchers. And it's amazing that over the years, the manufacturing and operations management people, I don't know exactly what happened, but somehow either missed or ignored or failed to give proper attribution to Woolard's work. So, as I said earlier, I was blown away by what I had read in the book, and then tracked down his papers and the detail that he describes these things. The production system is amazing, and so. Anyway, I felt it was really important to tell the lean community about Woolard's work, and so this past January I published a 55th anniversary special edition of his 1954 book, Principles of Mass and Flow Production, and I added to that book his paper from 1925 titled Some Notes on British Methods of Continuous Production. Just a few weeks ago, Peter Seymour and we've been writing a paper that's intended for operations management executives to introduce them to Woolard's long-forgotten work, because that community doesn't know about Woollard either.
Yeah, it's certainly I think missing from the key texts and the key timelines, like you said. So now that you've brought this back, the book's been republished. I've seen a copy of the book. I know there's more to it than just strictly republishing the material from 55 years ago. What did you add to this edition?
I added a preface, a forward, and an introduction, and the first 40 pages or so of the book contain, my commentary and analysis on Woolard's work, both as standalone, here's what he did, also in the context of the history of flow production, as well as in relation to Toyota and the development of their production system. And I also added a summary biography of Woollard and a list of his many publications. So in one of the sections in the beginning of the book, I inform people that it's important to recognize that Woolard's work in flow production in the mid to late 20s predates Kichiro Toyoda's interest in, who's the founder of Toyota, in flow production by almost 15 years. And that Woolard's work was well publicized in technical automotive production and engineering journals. The paper he wrote with William Morris's explicit approval demonstrated their very strong desire to share the details of their innovative continuous flow production processes with other people. And the intent, I believe, as well, had to be to showcase British industrial prowess. So their work, was not in any way a secret to anyone who would be interested in automobile production methods. That information on flow production at Morris Motors was easy to get for anybody interested in that type of thing. In addition, I also describe how it's clear that Ford was not Toyota managers' only influence. British and continental European automakers had customers who were a lot more like Toyota's in terms of wants and needs, and whose factories were on a smaller scale that people could more easily learn from in the early days. So I think this would have been much more relevant to Toyota between 1935 and 1950 to compare it to Ford's customers and Ford's just really expansive, vertically integrated production facilities. So one of the obvious questions that this leads to that I address in the introductory pages of the book is, was Kichira Toyota influenced by the work of Frank Woollard and by Morris Motors? And so, in the foreword, I very closely examine published records, corporate histories, timelines, etc. And it's interesting to note that Kichiro Toyota visited the UK in the early 1930s to visit automobile companies and machine tool makers of automotive machine tools and so forth. And it suggests he may have known about Woollard's work, and that it could have influenced him and other managers in their efforts to develop their own production system. There is a very strong, circumstantial evidence. There is no sort of smoking gun evidence, so to speak, but I lay out the evidence, and it's quite convincing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems very reasonable that Woollard's work could have been discovered and could have been a big influence that led us here to modern day lean. So, looking at the lean world today, how could modern day current practitioners of lean learn from going back and reading Woolard's work?
I think some of what it can help do is help people understand how advanced Woollard was in his thinking and practice of flow production. 90 years ago, he understood that achieving this is important points here. He understood that achieving flow in production alone was not enough, and that managers and workers have to connect all processes from beginning to end to achieve flow throughout the business. And this is 1925. He's talking about this stuff. So it highlights the limitations of today's focus on operations excellence, for example. We have to go beyond just what's happening in operations. Also, his pioneering work in low-volume flow production tells us that to achieve flow, managers have to discover innovations such as standardized work, just-in-time supermarket automation, either by themselves through their own efforts or through the work of others. It seems that if you're striving to achieve flow, it's driving every manager to more or less the same set of principles and practices. I think readers will also benefit by realizing, as Woollard did, that flow production is not going to work properly if it's used by management in a zero-sum win-lose manner, where the company benefits from process improvements, but employees who are redundant, who are made redundant by process improvement are laid off to reduce labor costs. So there's some understanding that, if for flow to exist, the interests of the key stakeholders must not be marginalized, that flow must cause no harm, and if it does, then, of course, material and information won't flow. I mean, finally, the book also informs lean management practitioners that many of the problems they face today are not new ones, and that the ways in which these problems are successfully dealt with are very similar.
Right. So to wrap up, can you tell us, so what happened to Woollard, to Morris Motors? I think a lot of us might not have ever heard of the company. If you can kind of share what happened there and some final thoughts.
Well, Americans would probably be most familiar with Morris Motors in terms of the MG motor cars. But anyway, Woollard, he passed away in late 1957, and apparently so did his life's work. He had a daughter, Joan, and she was an accomplished artist, but it doesn't seem like she had a lot of interest or capability in keeping her father's work alive. She just passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 92, I think. Anyway, Woolard's colleagues, in the day had tremendous admiration for him and his accomplishments, but almost all of them, except one colleague, has passed on, and really nobody has carried his work forward until now. Morris Motors, as I said, was the maker of MG motor cars. That ceased to exist in 1952, Morris Motors, when it merged with Austin Motor Company to form the British Motor Corporation. And unfortunately, innovations in production methods and machinery just are not sufficient to ensure long-term company success. Managers and workers, and they got to excel at a lot of other business processes, including voice of customer and coming out with new designs and short cycle time product development, introducing new automotive technologies, aftermarket service, etc. I mean, the production process alone or production system alone is not going to make a company successful long term.
That in and of itself, yeah. So
right.
Well, so I want to thank you for the new book and bringing Woollard's work to our attention. So, do you have any final thoughts to kind of wrap up the discussion?
Well, I think my research on Woolard's life and work offers some important lessons, and that one is that great ideas and practical innovations are either built off the work of others or sometimes they're developed independently. But it's important to dig and ask questions, because doing so is going to improve our understanding of the history and evolution of innovations that greatly benefit and enrich society. As probably many people know, when people discuss the origins of lean management, the conversation really centers around Ford Motor Company and Henry Ford and Charles Sorensen, and of course Toyota and Kichiro Toyota and Taiichi Ohno. And I think this research suggests that the conversation now needs to include Morris Motors and William Morris and Frank Woollard, and perhaps it should include others as well. We'll only know if researchers keep digging.
Well, you've dug up some interesting stuff here. If people are interested in finding out more about this book, your work, your other publications, what's the best place on the web for people to track you down?
They can go to BobEmiliani.com, BobEmiliani.com, and you can see a summary of the book contents and the reviews and so forth there. Okay,
well, great. I encourage people to do that and check out all of Bob's previous works and the Real Lean guidebooks, and other publications he's put out. It's great stuff. So I want to thank you for taking time out and sharing your work with us, Bob.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.